Hello and welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to a new episode of Africa Today, where we get you the latest news and events taking place on the African scene. And we will start off with our major top stories and reports. President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi participated in the 5th mid-year coordination meeting of the African Union and regional economic blocs in Nairobi. More details in this report.
President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi participated on Sunday in the 5th semi-annual coordination meeting of the African Union and African Economic Communities held in the Kenyan capital, Nairobi. During the meeting, el-Sisi presented Egypt's ambitious roadmap as the current chair of the steering committee of the African Development Agency, NEPAD, for the next 2 years. As the current president of the United Nations Climate Conference, COP27, he also tackled the environmental preservation and climate change and showcased Egypt's efforts to motivate advanced nations and international financial institutions to provide support and funding to African states to help them confront the repercussions of climate change. The African Union focused on boosting continental integration during its 5th mid-year coordination meeting on Sunday. The meeting brought together regional economic communities, RECs, regional mechanisms, RMs, and member states to review the progress of the continental integration agenda. The meeting explored ways to enhance integration, including promoting free movement and the African passport, as well as connecting infrastructure and financial markets. It also explored establishing a common African market to accelerate trade, agriculture, establishment of businesses, and transfer of skills in Africa. To accelerate these efforts, the meeting also discussed the division of labor between the AU, RECs, RMs, and member states anchored on the principles of complementary and competitive advantage. The division of labor is centered around 6 pillars: policy planning and formulation, policy adoption, policy implementation, monitoring, evaluation and reporting, resource mobilization, and partnerships. Also on the agenda was the financing of Agenda 2063, focusing on Africa's economic recovery and the implementation of initiatives to address challenges in agriculture, infrastructure, debt, climate change, security, energy, and health. This year's meeting was preceded by the meeting of the AU's Executive Council on 13th and 14th of July.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, and on this topic and the significance of the participation of President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi at the coordination meeting of the African Union and regional economic blocs in Nairobi, we're delighted to be joined over the phone by Dr. Magdi Alem, the Secretary General of the Arab Environmental Union. Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon.
Sir, President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi participated in the 5th mid-year coordination meeting of the African Union and regional economic blocs in Nairobi, Kenya. How do you see the significance of this meeting and the participation of President Sisi?
Actually, President Sisi is starting his mission as the President of Egypt, focusing on Africa continent as our background and the main sources of all kinds of crops and all of the food system are supplied by the farms in Africa. In spite the factor that there is, of course, extreme events of climate change, which is actually having more desertification and more arid land and more droughts also, so reducing the food security. So one of the major items in this UNCTAD conference, which is actually must be held periodically, it also focusing on Sharm el-Sheikh initiative for finance, just financing not only for the Africa or one country or Eastern or Northern or Southern, but actually for all the African countries. And so there is a day, that the day is a funding day, and it's collaborated with the United Nations Committee also as dealing with the COP27, how to finance the sources of mitigation of GHG greenhouse gases. So we are relying on this, and actually in Sharm el-Sheikh guidelines for equitable finance for the countries. The government of Egypt also, in cooperation with partners of development all over the world, especially the UNCTAD of the United Nations. So they are the main tool to support the increasing of the sources of the climate resilience financing, which is actually the challenge of the COP27, and we are going to submit our plan, not only Egypt but Africa, for the COP28 that will be held in Emirates. So this is the next step of the climate resilience, that all the countries all over the world looking for the new system of the nexus, including the water availability, the food availability, and the energy availability. We cannot apply this availability of the triangle of nexus to supply the food for the African countries without international cooperation. So the Ministry of International Cooperation in Egypt actually coordinated with more than 100 partners of development all over the world and scattered all over the different institutions and associations of the maybe World Bank, and some of them through the GEF, Global Environment Facility, and the other was through the initiative of the Medball for the Mediterranean, and the other initiatives also of all the partners related to Sharm el-Sheikh guidelines of justice finance. So the finance and the funds is nowadays are the main challenge as far as the technologies are accepted by most of the partners, and the mitigation methods are accepted, and also the resilience methodology are approved with the sector of energy and sector of agriculture and sector of housing and transport. So there is nowadays an international framework for what's called an initiative or innovative finance of the resources on all the...
Well, we lost our speaker over the phone, and we'll be back once again with our guest over the phone. Right, we're going to go to the next report, and we'll be right back with our guest over the phone. Stay tuned.
Said that war-torn Sudan's capital experienced a communications blackout for several hours on Friday as the army and paramilitary forces waged intense battles across Khartoum. Witnesses said that vital internet and mobile phone connections, which have been critical to sourcing information and supplies during nearly 3 months of war, were out of service as violent clashes raged in several parts of the city. The source of the malfunction was not immediately clear, and some mobile networks were restored by 11 a.m. local time, according to residents. Since April 15th, Army Chief Abdel Fattah al-Burhan has been at war with his former deputy, Mohammed Hamdan Daglo, who commands the paramilitary Rapid Support Forces. According to the United Nations, more than 1.5 million Khartoum residents have been forced to flee the airstrikes from above, tanks and fighters on the streets, and looting. Millions have remained trapped at home for fear of getting caught in the crossfire and the brutal urban warfare in Khartoum's densely populated neighborhoods, or of being attacked on the street. They have often relied on the internet to source basic needs, setting up crowdsourcing initiatives for escape routes, food and medicine. The fighting has killed at least 3,000 people across Sudan, according to the Armed Conflict Location and Event Data Project, with the worst fighting taking place in Khartoum and the western region of Darfur.
Welcome back, and once again with our guest over the phone, Dr. Magdi Allam, Secretary General of the Arab Environmental Union. Thank you, sir, for joining us once again. Dr. Allam,
Yes.
sir, we were talking about the participation of President Sisi at the coordination meeting of the African Union, and once again over climate change and the blue economy. President Sisi said that he appreciated the African participation at the COP27 meeting in Sharm el-Sheikh in November 2022, saying it reflected the African commitment to multilateral action for facing climate change. What's your take on that, sir?
Actually, it is very necessary for the African continent to so rapidly have their own plans to deal with the climate resilience and the mitigation of the climate change impact. So, in addition, for the extreme events and the corona crisis and the other crises also that affecting the total production of the food security of the country is actually so affected by the reduction of a lot of resources of increasing agriculture areas to supply the African farmers with their basic actually food. And this is a challenge. The challenge is how to make the food available as the first and the saving for life that we see, of course, the extreme events of children and women and other men also that immigrating from the dry land countries and up to 12 countries like Chad and Niger and Somalia and etc. Those 12, and of course the Chad, and those 12 countries are extremely affected by drought and reducing the income, the expected income of the production of food for healthy status for the children and women especially. So there is a special also funds that some of the, like the Citibank and other investment institution of GFA and Egypt, and actually the other funds for resilience, and also the coalition of Glasgow, the financial coalition of Glasgow as consulting for climate funding, and the other associations of Bill and Melinda and Gates and the UNICEF organization also, in addition to the African Development Bank and the European Development Bank,
yes,
and also the Islamic Development Bank. Those banks have nowadays a network to coordinate together with the African countries and also with the regional institutions like the Arab League or the other African leagues, also the African Union itself, to have an umbrella to increase the income of the farmers especially, and to support the new technology of solar energy instead of fossil fuel and the petroleum fuel, so to reduce the GHG, the greenhouse gases, and transferring it to what's called the clean technology, not actually the fossil fuel and petroleum and also the coal. So,
right. Well, Dr. Magdi Allam, I would like to thank you so much. Unfortunately, we're running out of time, sir. We will be once again with you in another episode to extend more on this topic. Thank you very much for joining us, Dr. Magdi Allam, Secretary General of the Arab Environmental Union. Many thanks for your insights, sir. And dear viewers, that brings us to the end of this edition of Africa Today. Many thanks for watching, and stay tuned for more coming up here on Nile TV International.